Well, welcome to lecture number 8 of the Kuzari, and we are in the first essay, or the Ma'amari shown, if you're following in the Hebrew version, and we are at paragraph number 83. And if you have this version of the Rabbi Korobkin version, then that would land you on page, 93. And I will be reading mostly from this Rabbi Michal Schwartz's version of which is a modern Hebrew translation directly from the Arabic. But either way, you can try to follow however you have it. So the Kuzari, and when I say the Kuzari, I'm gonna unless I specify, I mean the guy who's the king of Khazaria in this discussion, and the Chaver is the rabbi who he's having a dialogue with. Occasionally, I might slip and say the Kuzari and be referring to the book or Rabbi Yehuda Levi, but I'll try to stay away from such slips in the future. But what's happening now is we were kind of left last time in the middle of a discussion about a particular topic. And the question that the Kuzari posed to the Chaver was how exactly did Judaism come about, right? How did this religion come to be? And he assumed every religion starts right with somebody has an idea, somebody has some, an idea, whatever his conception is, and he teaches that, he discusses this idea for a religion with his friends and supporters and students, etc. And then from there it spreads to others, sometimes through coercion, sometimes through violence, sometimes maybe just through proselytization and convincing people that it's true, and so on. And eventually it grows and grows, and now you have a world religion. But so how did Judaism come to be, right? Who was the guy who thought up of Judaism, and who was the guy who taught it to everybody, and how did it spread, etc., etc.? So the Chaver began his answer to this question by saying, you're making a mistake, right? And this was in paragraph 81, right? Judaism is not like other religions, because the other religions started like the way you described. So you can discuss the history. So and so was born in such and such a year. He had all these ideas, maybe he had them as a vision from God, whatever it was. And then he taught those ideas, he preached those ideas, and eventually it caught on. But Judaism, so when things come and they start from human beings, when a human being makes up the religion, right? So then it starts from a person, and then that's how the history goes. But if it comes from God, then it doesn't have to start from a person. God is the one who reveals this religion to his people, and then the people, now there's a religion. Now there's a bunch of people practicing that religion and believing whatever it is that religion teaches. Now, so the Kuzari's response was in Pei Beis, that's 82, paragraph 82. The Kuzari says, "You're freaking me out, Hifalto Tano Hechaver, Mr. Rabbi, right? You're like, what in the world are you talking about? Like, this is like, how exactly does this happen? You're telling me something, but that sounds kind of ridiculous." So the Chaver answers, and this is what we're about to read, right? And it's going to be a long, long discussion. And it's going to give us a very clear understanding of how Rabbi Yehuda Levi understands the development of Judaism and what the basis of Judaism is. And so it's very important. But it's very, and I pointed this out last time, that it's very different from the Rambam's understanding. If you remember, the way when we learned more Nevuchim together, the Rambam understood that Judaism did spread pretty much exactly like the way the Kuzari understood the other religions. It was Avraham Avinu who figured out and decided that there must be one God, and then he promulgated the idea of monotheism throughout the world. So therefore, the fundamental spread and start of the Jewish religion, the Rambam started from a human being. It was from a person who looked at the world, studied what he saw, thought about what he saw, and came to the conclusion that paganism and idol worship made no sense at all, and there must be one God, and so on. The Kuzari is outright saying, or Buddha Levi actually is saying in this book, through the words of the Chaver, that this is not how Judaism came to be. So how did it come to be? So Amar Chaver. So says the Chaver in response in paragraph 83. Hadavar mavhil yoser. It's actually even crazier than you think. You think I'm saying a wild idea, but it's even more wild than you can imagine. And he starts with a little history lesson. Bnei Yisrael hayu mishubadim b'Mitzrayim. The people of Israel were enslaved in Egypt. We were the lowest of the low, slaves in Egypt. There were 600,000 of us that were 20 and up. So you're talking about many, many more. Each one had a name, right? They were understood and known to be Jews living in Egypt. And each one knew his or her tribe, what tribe they were a member of the 12 tribes. In other words, they maintained their ethnicity despite being enslaved in Egypt. Not a single person decided to leave the Jewish people and join the Egyptian people, right? None of them even escaped Egypt and went anywhere else. People didn't join them. They remained a distinct ethnic identity in Egypt. And this was because they were waiting for the fulfillment of a promise. They knew that their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, peace be upon them, had a promise from God, that one day they would get out of Egypt and they would inherit the land of Israel. And remember, at that time, that the land of Israel was under the occupation or the control of the 7 nations. At the time, they were at the height of their numbers. They were strong and they were powerful and they were successful. And they had this faith, even though they were in the lowliest of times and the lowliest of positions in the world. So the setup that he's painting here, it's remarkable, and it's something that is true about the Jewish experience for forever. It's not just that in Egypt, right? The idea that despite being lowly, despite being despised by all of our surroundings, we managed to maintain an ethnic identity, a religious identity, because we have a hope and a promise that one day we're going to go back to our land, and one day things are going to get better. It's remarkable because I'm not aware of any other such thing in all of humanity, of any other such group of people that has weathered this storm in this way. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi is painting this picture of the Jewish people in Egypt. Under any logical circumstance, we should have disappeared. We should have, if people, but no one abandoned our heritage. We stayed, we stuck with it because we had this hope. We always had this hope, despite when you look around you, the hope was a ridiculous hope. Who could imagine such a thing ever happening? Inherit the land of Israel? That's ridiculous, right? The Ufaro hayahoriges yaldeim, and the Pharaoh was killing their children so that they shouldn't increase in their numbers. And Oz nishluchu Moshe v'Aaron, and then Moshe and Aaron, Moses and Aaron came, aleim shalom, peace be upon them, v'amdu cherev chulshasam, and despite their weakness, nochach Paro, they were able to stand against Pharaoh, lamros kocho, despite his power. They were able to stand against him, ba'osos, with signs from heaven, benisim, and miracles, uva'afaras menogo shalom, and completely uprooting the normal way of the world. Here you have these two people, powerless people, are standing in front of the most powerful king of the most powerful empire, and they're leaders of a bunch of slaves. And here they're able to stand in front of him, and he's not able to do anything about it. He couldn't get away from them. He couldn't decree to throw them into the dungeon. He couldn't protect himself from the 10 plagues. shepagu b'toshavei Mitzrayim, the plagues that infected and affected the residents of Egypt, the citizens of Egypt. It affected their water, b'admasam, their land, ba'aviram, their air, b'tzimcheim, their plants, b'valechaim shalahem, and their livestock, b'gufeim, their bodies, b'nafshasem, and their very lives. Shekain mesu b'chatzi alayla, they at Chatzos in the midnight, many died. Karafayan at a sudden moment. Hayikarim v'Yahuvim v'Yoser, the most beloved children of their homes. Hayabu v'Ateim kol yeled b'char, every firstborn. Lohaya bayis v'Lomeis, there wasn't a single family that didn't have a death in it. L'ma'et bat ibnei Yisrael, other than the houses of the people of Israel. Kol hamakos eila pagu v'hem b'tzav. All of this happened by command. Azara v'iyum. In other words, they were warned about it. It wasn't just random things that happened to happen. They were told this is what's going to happen. So that they should know that these are from God. They weren't just random events. So they should know that it's God doing them because He wants to do them, and they're not just plain old natural disasters. They're not by chance, and they're not happening because of the stars or any other force, but they're happening because of God, which is why they were warned. B'nai Yisrael yatzu al pi mitzvahs Elohim mishibud paro. And by the word of God, by the command of God, the people of Israel left the enslavement of Pharaoh, of Paro, but also alayla shebomesi yaldei hamitzrim. On the same night that the children of the Egyptians died, they came to the Yamsuf, the Red Sea of Reeds, whatever you want to translate that. Kasher Amud Anan Movilam, at a time when the pillar of clouds was leading them, Amud Eish Holech Lefneim, and a pillar of fire was going before them, and Alam was leading them, Benoigbam. V'rosham Holchu Shnei Hazkenim, and leading them at the head was the two elders, Elokim, the godly people, Moshe v'Aaron, Moses and Aaron, Aleim Shalom, Shezachol and Nevuah, Kashayu b'nei Lamala Mishmonim. When they were over the age of 80, they were merited the privilege of prophecy. Ad achshav lo hayu lahem ela mitzvos muatos. Until this point, they only had a very few commandments, only very few responsibilities towards God that they had to do. Shekiblu b'Yerusha mayosem yechinim. Only those things that they were makabel, in other words, they accepted by tradition, that they learned from Adam and Noah, from Adam and Noah, just the basic rules of morality, the 7 Noahide laws. Moshe lo bitel osan v'lo hefer osan. He didn't come and tell them you don't have to do any more of those things. This is obviously a swipe to Christianity, where you come and attract people to religion by telling them, oh, you don't need to keep the laws anymore, right? So he didn't do that, right? Aval Hosefalaim, but rather what Moshe did was he said, not only do you have to keep the old laws, I'm going to give you a whole list of new ones that you're supposed to keep. I mean, he obviously had Christianity in mind when he said that. Paro rodav achareim, and Pharaoh chased after them. Achem lo ne'altzu le'echos b'neshek. However, they weren't able to carry with them weapons, right? Ha'am gam lo hayum b'lumdei milchama. The nation, they didn't even know how to fight with weapons. They weren't trained soldiers. They were slaves that worked in the building buildings and making bricks or whatever they did. Hayom nivka, and the sea split. Vehim overbo, and they passed through the sea. Paro v'nikbatzav tavu, and Pharaoh and all of the people that gathered around them drowned in the sea. Vayom heitilo samesim al bnei Yisrael, and the sea spit them forth onto the ground, dead after they drowned. Acharo osam beineam. Asipur Aruchim Meforsim. The story is well known, and it's a long story. I just gave a quick, short version of it. So there's a lot of points here in the story, but the bottom line is he says this story in order to tell us what the origin of the Jewish people is, right? It's not a story of a person who convinced everybody of his ideas, right? Rather, it is the story of a people that lived through an experience, a foundational experience that built a relationship between them and God. And this is really the fundamental idea. And so let's just see in chapter 84, Omer HaKuzari. So the Kuzari, the king, answers, Zeh be'emes hadavar Elohi. This is truly the word of God. Chayavim l'kabel es haTorah mislava elav. So we must accept upon ourselves the Torah which goes along with this story, this foundational story that you just told me. Shekain ein nichnas lalev safek shema hayu b'kriyas yamsuf kishufo tachbula ha'ataya. Right? Because it can't even enter our minds a doubt that maybe, right, um, this whole thing was just a magic or some trick or some sleight of hand, right? Ilu nidma lahem yam v'shehu nivka v'heim shehem avrubo, right? And even if you're going to say that maybe it was all a trick, somehow they thought there was a sea, but it really wasn't a sea. They thought they passed through the sea. All right, there's all kinds of things, right? It can't possibly be that they imagined that they became free, right? The freedom from Pharaoh, the freedom of the people, which is the main part of the story, is clearly true. And they clearly saw the people that were their enslavers, their oppressors, were dead. Because they went and they took their the booty. They took the wealth from the dead bodies of the Egyptians. They had them. They held them. They whatever they took from the Egyptians, they were holding in their pockets or on their strapped to their backs. So obviously it happened. So they can't make that stuff up, right? Zos hi kviya shriruyo soko, from someone who tries to even say that that's not true, could only be an apikor, meaning someone who is a denier of reality. So the key point that what the Kuzari, and here I'm saying what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is really trying to say and putting it in the mouth of the king of the Kuzarim is somewhat, you might want to say, someone might read that the Chaver is trying to teach us because there were miracles, therefore we should believe in God. What you're putting in this mouth of the Kuzari is, yes, it's true there were miracles, and therefore, and yeah, it's sure we should believe in God. But even if you negate the miracles, the story of freedom from oppression, right, is good enough. You don't even need the miracles, even if you could tell me that it was all somehow trickery. The bottom line is it's miraculous anyway, right? The story is miraculous anyway. Which this is something that comes up a lot, when you look at the success of the modern state of Israel, or the survival of the Jewish people. And, if somebody wants to tell you some crazy miracle story that happened to so-and-so, and okay, that's a beautiful story. And I'm not saying it is or isn't true. I have no idea, but you don't need to come on to crazy miracles to realize that our story is remarkable, right? And even without that, and so this little paragraph here is a very important one, because a lot of people misunderstand Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in thinking that he's founding the religion, basing the religion on the existence of miracles, which is not really 100% true. He's saying, yes, there were miracles, but the bottom line is look at the very fact that we were oppressed, that we were enslaved in Egypt, right, and became freed, and eventually made it to the land of Israel and established ourselves in our own land. That's a miracle. You don't have to come on to lightning bolts and splitting seas, right? So let's look at Pehei 85. Amar hechaver, and then the Chaver said, but it didn't stop then. Didn't stop after they escaped. It's more. It keeps on going. Mekivan she'egiu el hamidbar, they reached the wilderness in their wandering. Makom she'ein bo zera, a place where there aren't cultivated fields there, so how do they get enough crops and food to eat? Humtar lahem yom yom mazon shudkan v'nivra, food fell from the sky. L'mayit b'yom Yeshavas, except for on the day of the Sabbath. Hem ochlu osu b'meshach arba'am shanim, for 40 years they ate that. So again, it's a similar thing, because yes, it's true, it was a miracle. Man fell from the sky. But the bottom line is you had a nation that wandered for generations. After being enslaved, we wandered as a tribe of people, wandering through places that were inhospitable to life, certainly not life for large groups of people. And we managed to make it through that, which is, again, remarkable. Amar Kuzari gamzos ein lishlol. So the Kuzari says, I can't argue with this either. When you have 600,000 adult men together with all the people with them, including women and younger men and older people, Yored Shisha Yamim, right? And that enough food came down every day, Shisha Yamim, for 6 days, and Musulak b'Shabbos, except for the 7th day of Shabbos. Chayavim l'kabel et Shabbos. So certainly we must accept upon ourselves the special mitzvah of Shabbos, of Shabbat. Because this great word of God, right, is basically is connected to this tremendous idea. So Omar HaChaver, so the Chaver answered back. This is paragraph 87 now. So in the Korobkin version, I guess I am now up to where? I am up to page 98. All right. So Chashivusa shel hashabbos novas mize. Yes, the specialness of Shabbos, of the Sabbath, does come from this. Umikach shehaolam, and it also comes from something else. Shehaolam nivra b'shisha yamim, the fact that the world was created in 6 days. V'chein mimasha ani omed l'tzayin, but also from another idea, a third idea, which I'm going to explain. For who and what is that idea? Sha'afal pisha acharei hanisim ha'ela ha'am ha'aminu l'divrei Moshe alav shalom. Even though it's true, after seeing all of these wondrous things, right? The people believed Moshe. They realized that Moshe was a great leader. He led them to freedom. He led them away from oppression. Moshe is obviously a great leader who has accomplished tremendous things in leadership, way more than almost any other leader in history. But nish'ar b'safek nafshosayim, but still in their minds, they still are left. They have doubts. How is it possible that what Moshe is teaching us is knowledge that he received from God? How is it that God can communicate with a human being? What he's really asking here, the Kuzari is really asking is, yeah, it's all well and good, right, that Moshe is a great leader. And it's all well and good that this was a tremendous accomplishment and this is incredible and wonderful and miraculous and everything. But what about believing the ideas that Moshe is teaching us? Are these truly ideas from God? Or maybe Moshe is just a great leader and he's making them up, or, maybe some of them are good, some of them are bad. How do we know that this religion, that these ideas are true, right? He claims that they're true because he's receiving them from God. But how do we know that they're true? Which is remarkable, because I want to make this a point, because what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is acknowledging here is that the miracles of the Exodus of Egypt are not enough to convince even the people that experienced them that God is true. Absorb that idea. I really want you to absorb that idea. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi understands and acknowledges that miracles alone, even the most incredible miracles that you can possibly imagine, as stated in the story of the Exodus, is not enough for people to accept the ideas of the religion as true. In order to accept that, they need to accept that Moshe is teaching them knowledge that actually comes from God. And how could that be? How could it be that God can communicate knowledge through a human being? So they didn't know. So they were still in a state of doubt. Okay. So how is it possible? Right? How is it possible that the Torah, right, could be something that God communicates through a human being. It doesn't make sense, right, that a being who is not a human, who is not a created being like we are, should be able to speak, right? Philosophically, it doesn't make sense that God should be able to communicate with human beings. God is something so far beyond us. How is it that there's a connection? How can we receive godly knowledge? How does that work? How does that happen? Sharia Pnia Bediber Gashmis, because it's a physical thing. Speech is something that I'm creating right now with my mouth and my tongues and my lips, etc., and my lungs and my vocal cords. I'm creating speech and making sounds, and you're hearing them through the speakers, that they all of a sudden have meaning. But God is not a physical being. He doesn't have a mouth. He doesn't have teeth. He doesn't have tongues, etc. So how does this work? So Elohim Ratza Lahasir Safek Shesh Elohim. God wanted to remove that doubt. God wanted them to understand that this knowledge, these ideas that they're being taught, which comprise of the Torah, are real, and they truly do come from God. Right? But he told them, prepare yourselves, prepare your bodies in purity, right? And get ready for an event. He said, separate yourselves from your wives, in order that you can completely prepare yourselves spiritually, physically, emotionally for this, for you to receive this knowledge, for you to recognize the truth of God. They prepared themselves, and they got themselves ready for that level of prophecy themselves. Yes, more than that, right? More than that, not just that they were going to have a nevuah, a prophecy, which is often a dream or a vision, but they were going to actually, physically, all together hear the word of God themselves. After 3 days, with beginning with tremendously powerful events, Birakim, lightning, Ramim, and thunders, Ridas Adama, and earthquakes, lavos, Aish, and flashes of flame and fire, Ikifwas, Komasha, Koral, Asina, were surrounding all the events that were going on at Sinai. Osa Aish Nishar Arbam Yom Alahar, which remained for 40 days on the mountain. Hamra Osa, the nation saw this. Uroas Moshe Nichnas Letocho V'yotzim Mimena, they saw Moshe, they saw Moses going in and out of these flames. So Am Shomas Apnia B'Dibur B'Lashon Tzacha, they heard these words in a clear language, Ba'asora Dvarim, in 10 words, 10 statements. Remember that we should all keep reminding ourselves that people walk around and keep referring to the 10 commandments, which in Jewish literature, it's a Christian thing that they call them commandments. They're not 10 commandments. They're Aseret HaDibrot, the Aseret Devarim, the 10 statements. If you look at them, they're not necessarily commandments. The way they're written as 10 statements. And the reason why that's important is because the whole idea is that these were statements that we heard directly from God. Exactly what he means by hearing them directly from God, we're going to get into a little more. So let's leave that question open for a second. But remember, the approach, if anyone ever tells you, if you ask them if you know the 10 commandments, you could say, I don't know. There's 613 commandments. What are the 10 what? Right? So they mean the things that were given at Sinai. Yeah, those are the 10 statements, right? At least that's our religion. We have to remember what our religion tells us. Anyway, so Shehem Ikre HaMitzvah Shor Shein. Echad mehem, one of them, Hayatzivah al Shabbos, is a command, and it's the command regarding the mitzvah of Shabbos, of the Sabbath. Hatzivoy Oleha Kvar Kodam Lekach. The command to keep Shabbos already came before that, Kosher B'Yirida Saman, because it was tied to the falling of the manna, right? Which was within which came the command of keeping Shabbos, which actually preceded. Aseres Hadibros Eila, these 10 statements, Lo Nimsuru La'ami Pigvarim Yichidim, they weren't given to the people through a specific people. There wasn't a teacher that taught these to us. And this is crucial. And this is, again, the Rabbi Levi is trying to point out that in our story, we don't have a person teaching us the religion, right? We don't have a person teaching us, Anochi Hashem Lekach, I am Hashem your God. There isn't a person who told us about it, right? But rather, Lo Mipi Navi, it wasn't a prophet. El Mipi Elohim, it was God himself. We all received that knowledge. Ulam Lo Hayolam Koach Kol Choshem Moshe Alav Shalom. We didn't have the power, the strength, the physical, emotional wherewithal to handle this incredible revelation like Moshe did. Liros es hadavar agad lahu, to see this great thing. So our vision wasn't as grand as his, and he received the whole Torah. We only received those 10 statements. Also Yom Min Ha'am, but from that day the people believed and understood Shemoshe alav shalom mekabel pniya b'dibur shemakora belohim, that in some way, a way that we still don't understand, we still can't explain, and we're going to see soon that Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to tell us that exactly what the people heard, right, and how it is that God communicated it to them is not something that we fully understand. But what we do understand is that at that event, all of the people there had an experience which was completely convincing to the people that were standing at the foot of Sinai that this is real and this is God communicating with us. Exactly what happened, what they heard, what they saw. There's no way we'll ever know or understand. There can never know or understand how it works. There's no, nobody can give us an explanation of what happened. But one thing did happen. Something happened, and all of the people together recognized that we can communicate, we can hear from God, and thus then they were able to believe that Moshe also has that ability to communicate, but on a bigger and higher level, so that they were able to realize that when Moshe is teaching us the Torah, he's actually teaching us the wisdom that comes from God, and it's not just some person that happens to have a tremendous amount of skill and can do lots of magic tricks and convince us of things. So remember this. It's just very important, a very important point. It's not the miracles that came through Moshe that was the reason why we believed in him. And it's not the miracles that is the reason why we should believe in him, right? It is the fact that as a nation, we've went through experiences that make it clear to us that it's real. And those experiences, the real truth is, it's not just Sinai. It's all of the experiences that we have went through for thousands of years together as a people have convinced most of us that this is real. And can you explain it? Can you describe it? Not really. But we know it because we experience it and we live it and we realize it. So Moshe didn't think about it before. He didn't plan this out, come up with some strategy. How am I going to convince everybody? Right? He didn't call together his campaign team and see, how am I going to sell my ideas so I get elected? Right? He didn't have this knowledge before, but rather this is Kadesh and Hanavua lo tehei. Right, Nevuah should not be. Now, this is again different, very different from Maimonides. Remember that when Rambam explained this idea, he explained that Moshe had the ability to access and understand the knowledge of God more than any other human being because of the knowledge that Moshe had attained, because Moshe had attained the height of wisdom, because he knew and understand everything about the world and everything about science and everything about philosophy and everything about godly knowledge and spiritual knowledge. And he was on such a high level of knowledge that he was able to ascertain as close to knowledge of God that a human being is able to get, right? The Kuzari here and Rida Levi here is directly arguing on that idea of the Rambam and saying that no, was not Moshe's knowledge that then he was able to understand this knowledge of God, but rather it was something that he merited, obviously because of the great person that he was, but it was something that God gave to him, right? It was from God given to him as opposed to the other way around. Not the way the prophecy is not like the philosophers think, that it comes minefesh, that it comes from a soul, that it comes from a person who has purified his processes of thought, that he can, this is a direct attack on the people that felt like the Rambam did, right? Hakari Ruach HaKodesh or Gabriel, and they call it that. So when you know and you get to a certain spot in your development, in your emotional and your intellectual development, you get to a point where you can tap into that thing called Ruach HaKodesh, which would translate to the Holy Spirit, right? Not similar to what other religions call Holy Spirit. This Ruach HaKodesh meaning this tapping into this spiritual knowledge that comes from God, or Gabriel, or other religions that attribute it to the angel Gabriel, which he's obviously referring to the religion of Islam here. And then you somehow are able to accept this. You're able to be a receptacle for this knowledge. And some people get these visions in their sleep, or some people get them whether they're asleep or whether they're awake, as if a man is speaking to them. And a person hears in his imagination, he hears the speech v'lo ba'aznav, but not with his ear, huroa also b'tchushas libo, and he hears it in his heart, v'lo ba'eno, but he doesn't see it with his eyes, v'azeh omer, and then he says, she'elim diber love, that God has spoken to him. And these were ideas that the philosophers understood how you can speak to God, which is very close to how Rambam described Nevuah, if you remember, those that studied that with us together. But Rabbi Yehuda Levi, as is arguing on that, he's saying something completely different. He's saying that this is not what Nevuah and prophecy is. Chashados elu hukchashu b'mamad gadol. All of these suspicions, right, about whether or not what Moshe heard was really from God, right? And whether or not it's possible to really hear from God, whether or not this knowledge that we call the Torah that's being taught to us is from God. Hukhashu b'mamad hagadol, all of that was completely contradicted. All of those suspicions were wiped away in that great moment when we all stood right at the foot of Sinai, and the writing of God, and as God spoke, he was writing on the tablets, and that godly writing that was written dispelled all of our doubts. Because he himself engraved as Aseres HaDibros these 10 statements al shnei luchos miyesod nala, on two tablets of stone. He gave them to Moshe. And when they saw them, it was obvious that the writing was from God. The same way that what they heard, what they saw and what they heard was obvious that it was coming from God. Moses, alav shalom, may he rest in peace be upon him. Also, he made for them an ark. And he placed over the ark, he put it in a tent, the well-known tent of meeting, as it's known, the Ohel Moed. And this Ohel Moed was where the ark remained for as long as prophecy existed among the Jewish people, which was approximately 900 years. Ad shehimra until the people rebelled against God, and the Aron was lost. The governor Nebuchadnezzar, and eventually the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, came and sent us into exile. So that's the end of 87, and we get to page number let's see, page number 101 in the Korobkin edition. So we're getting a feel for remember what the Chaver is telling the Kuzari. He's explaining where Judaism comes from. This is the origin story of our religion, and he's saying it with so much power, so much emotion, so much feeling that it's hard for it not to have an effect on our hearts. So you can kind of understand why this book became so popular among the Jewish people pretty soon after it was written. I'm not stopping here, but I want to stop in case there's comments or questions or observations that people want to make.
Just a quick question. Is this studied in the yeshivas?
Is this or was this?
Well, is it now studied in yeshivas?
There definitely are yeshivas in which it is studied. It is very it's very popular in the religious Zionist world. In fact, I have somewhere on my table here a book by Rav Aviner on the Kuzari, which I consult sometimes when I prepare these, and he's one of the leaders of the religious Zionist movement. I mean, it depends what kind of yeshiva you go to. I mean, to the extent that they even teach philosophy at all, if they do, then the Kuzari is definitely high on the list. But a lot of yeshivas don't focus that much on philosophical matters. But if they do, then this is certainly a very well accepted book. Unlike the Moreh Nevuchim, which is almost never studied in most yeshivas, except for maybe a small few rationalist types.
Yeah, I think I shared with you the comment that the local rabbi said. He said, I don't have any questions. I have no doubts about what's going on.
Yeah. Well, you can see how the Kuzari, first of all, appeals a lot to the emotions. Um, and he I mean, he really tries to set your soul a bit on fire, and he's not making philosophical rationalist arguments like the Rambam did. He's not making trying to explain things in a scientifically valid way. He's just not doing that. That's just not the way he works. And he directly is disagreeing, with the Rambam's understanding of Judaism and how Judaism developed and so on. Now, for me, what's important for all these classes that we're learning together is not so much. I mean, I would love it if people find something that speaks to their heart and that really turns them on, and that's great. Whether it's Maimonides or Kuzari or whatever we learned together over the years, but the point is that what I really want to convey is these very dramatically different understandings of Judaism, right? And it's what we're going to see, and you can already see this developing, is that the way you understand things like this, how Judaism developed, has a very uh, profound influence over how you believe Judaism should be practiced and taught and experienced and lived, right? And it leads to very different conclusions as to how you relate to people that are not Jews, or how you relate to the Torah in general, how you view your purpose in life, how you view the purpose and Judaism, where you find meaning and so on. These things are very important, so these sound like lofty ideas, but they have very real practical ramifications. To me, knowing that I have all of these options is more important than anything else, because at different times in our lives we draw strength from different things. So I just want everyone that studies with us, whether you're here live or watching and on recordings or whatever, I want everyone to really keep that in mind, that when somebody comes and tells you that Judaism teaches XYZ, right? And then you think to yourself, well, Judaism teaches a lot of things. you know it teaches a lot of things, and they're not, and sometimes they're very different and contradictory, but it's important. They're all part and parcel of our religion, our heritage, and the kinds of things that our leaders and thinkers and philosophers over the many, many centuries have argued about, debated, and wrote about. And I want people to be exposed to some of the major ones. So here we are. So let's do 88, paragraph 88. For some reason, my clock is not showing on my computer anywhere, so I'm looking at my watch. So we still have time, 15 minutes, so we can probably do a little bit more before we end for the night. So Amar Kuzari says the king of the Khazars, right? So in the Korobkin version. I'm on page 101, paragraph number 88 is what I'm about to read. Hashomea estifrechem, one who hears your words. Now he's going to come at the rabbi, the Chaver, with a tremendous complaint here, right? And that is that, wait a minute, hold on, right? And it's almost a Maimonidean complaint, right? Because are you telling me that God actually talked to people? Hold it a minute. There's a problem there, right? Someone that hears you say that God actually turned to you guys, to your nation, and actually spoke the Kosavlam and wrote Luchos Yisulachlo, he should be forgiven if he thinks, if he's going to think that you Jews think that God has somehow incarnated in some sort of human form, right? All right, because who speaks? People speak, right? You're telling me God speaks? Do you think God became a person somehow? That's kind of sounding like another religion which you didn't really like before, right? So does God become human? Really? Is that what's going on? Right? So v'gam lochem yisulach, right? And you should be forgiven, Shari Lamnitan lahakrish hamamadim hagedolim hamiforim v'hagluyim la'in eila, right? I could understand, right, that 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 you should, let me see, I'm trying to think of the best way to translate that. he says, it would seem that you could not condemn such a person because no one can dispute the great physical revelations, right? Even if you guys were to think that God was somehow a physical being, right? And you can't contradict the fact that you heard him speaking. So what's going on, right? So you're going to then right, it would make sense for you to reject the paths of the philosophers, and then conclude that God is some sort of a human being who talks to us. So what's going on here? There's something wrong with your statement. So Amar HaChaver. So the Chaver, the rabbi, comes back and answers, Yishmareni Ha'el, right? May absurd, right? May God protect me from saying something this absurd. And that which logic dictates is clearly absurd. So here you have the Chaver kind of you have Rabbi Yehuda Halevi turning into a little bit of a Maimonidean here, right? In other words, hold on a minute. I know I said that the people heard speech. I know I said that the people saw God writing. I get that. But it doesn't mean, right? It can't possibly mean that they actually heard like an actual God speaking, because that's ridiculous, right? Right? That makes no sense, right? It makes no philosophical sense. Certainly makes no religious sense to state that God has any physical form. Harishon, first of all, first in the Aseret Hadibro, the 10 statements, right? God commanded us to believe in God. That was the first thing he told us. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? So belief in God, which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi assumes you understand, means a God, basically a Maimonidean God, who we don't understand, we can't define, we can't experience, we can't describe, etc., right? Hadibra Sheni Hua Isur, and then the second thing, he warned us and prohibited us. We shouldn't. We're not allowed to believe in anything else. We're not allowed to even attach things to him and say that there's God and there's also fill in the blank. Like other religions, fill in the blank. There's also, so-and-so who's also God, right? Or something near him or something like him. We don't believe that stuff. We're Jews, right? We're not supposed to believe that stuff, right? We're not allowed to compare him to other people and say God is like fill in the blank. We're not allowed to even make parables and say, God is, and make a story up of a king and a this and a that, and it doesn't work that way, right? And certainly not to make God incarnate, to make him into some sort of human, or to make him into some sort of a physical being. That's completely forbidden for Jews and completely illogical philosophically. So clearly, and that's in the Aseret Hadibrot, in the 10 statements themselves. It's inherent in that. So v'ketzad lo nitvoso so kinale me'akshama. So how is it possible, right, that we should not elevate God, right, above the physical, right? Right? He said, and then he's going to go ahead and use a comparison, but a comparison to help us understand what this means by we can't compare to God, right? So he says a lot of things that God created, right? Kigon hanefesh hasichlis, like the soul, it's our intellect, right? Our soul, what we experience, ourselves, right? Our self-awareness of ourselves. We don't have any way of understanding or describing what that is. You can call it a soul. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to call it a soul, right? We'll call it a nefesh. When, let's say, Moshe Rabbeinu himself turns to us and gives us a speech, he tells us a teaching of the Torah, right? Umevin umanig, and he understands and he leads us and he tells us this is how God wants us to perform such and such a mitzvah. This is what we're supposed to do. It's not really his tongue that's teaching us. It's not his brain that's thinking things that's teaching us. It's not his heart that's teaching us, right? Ela kalim l'Moshe. These are just tools and vessels that Moshe, whatever essence that is, Moshe is using, right? Moshe hu nefesh tichlis mavchina. Moshe himself is a soul, right? Is an entity right? Which is able to tell things. And he's really saying a very, very deep philosophical idea, which is very important for anyone that's ever practiced or learned almost any form of meditation. And I have had the chance in my life to learn from some Eastern practitioners of meditation that one of the things to try to learn is who is the true self, right? What's the true self, right? And if you keep boiling down, right, when we describe ourselves, right, but who's the one that's doing the descriptions, right? And you keep driving down and you come to, there's an observer within us, right, that we can't define, that we can't explain, right? And when we can get in touch with that self, that is like the true meaning of meditation. That's when you're really, really residing within yourself and within your true soul, and not within all of the outer trappings of everything else. So what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is right here talking about is he's talking about this idea, right? That it's true that there's a Moshe Rabbeinu, but you and I both know that Moses, right, when he's teaching us things, it's coming from the actual Moses. It's not coming from his body, his mouth, even his brain. Those are all physical things. It's coming from Moshe, right? It's something that doesn't have a place. There's no specific spot. Oh, in that corner of the body, that's where the soul is, right? There's an inch by inch little spot in the middle of the brain. That's where soul resides, right? So far, with all the MRI technology that we haven't yet identified that little square spot, right? Because it doesn't exist. There is no spot where it is. There isn't, right, a special tiny place for it. Right? So how do we describe it? We describe it as a spiritual entity. That soul is some kind of spiritual entity. We can't describe it, we can't define it, but this awareness of self that we all have within us, and we should also be realized that other people have awareness of themselves. There's something within them. There's something there that we can't define, we can't explain, we can't measure, we can't localize. So Alachas Kama V'Kama Borei Hakol, right? How much more so is the creator of all of the world? That there is an entity called God that we can't describe, we can't explain, we can't localize, we can't measure where he is. We can't say, oh, over here there's 15 measurements of godliness, and over here there's only 10, and over there there's 150. There's no such thing, right? Because so he's using the parable of a soul. Interestingly, after he just told us that we're not allowed to compare things to God, he's comparing something, but whatever. Anyway, right? However, that even though this is true that we can't describe God, we still also are prohibited from saying that our experience wasn't real. Our experience at Sinai wasn't real. We imagined it. We didn't actually hear speech. It wasn't true. It didn't really happen. So we say that I have no idea how it was that those words made it through the sound waves to my ears, right? And how that became sounding like human speech, and it's something that our ears heard. But our ears did hear it. Right? Exactly what it was that God created for this moment so that it should somehow work, that should happen. Right? Whatever it did, God is able to do it because he can do what he wants. Right? It's the same thing for the writing on the tablets. Because of how he wrote this special engraving. The same way he created the entire universe, he created the heavens and the stars. I don't know. There's no way to know how he did it. Somehow this happened. But the point is, though, we did hear something, and it was real, and it actually entered our ears and then our brains and ultimately our souls. And it came from a being who we still cannot know, cannot explain, cannot describe, but we know he's there. Elohim Yisrael Chafetz, he wanted it to happen, and therefore they became real. In the way that he wanted, Matkonas, and in the form that he wanted. And it was written on those tablets, the 10 statements. The same way we know that he split the sea. Are we going to describe how he split the sea? He split the sea by coming down and putting up walls, or by putting in a giant vacuum cleaner that sucked up all. Who knows? I don't know. I don't care. There's no way you'll ever know. It doesn't matter. The point is, he did it, right? Not through the physical things that you and I can explain. We also, Sohomos, he made them like walls that omdos mi yamin ha'amu, small that stood on our right and our left, and pathways, and that the bottom wasn't just a mud pile. It was a place that we can actually go. We can go without problems, without trouble, right? That pathway through the sea, that building, of those walls of water, we know that God was the one that made that happen. He doesn't need any utensils. He doesn't need means. He doesn't need an engineering team to figure out how to accomplish the feat. Like human beings need when we want to accomplish something like that. The water stood because God said so. And they took the form that he told them because that's what he wanted. In the same way, the air that reached our ears carried the words that God spoke, and Vatzibur Yishmu Osan, and the public, the people that were standing there, heard them. And then the Kuzari answers in 90, Zos Ta'anam Meshachnas. This is a convincing argument. So we're going to stop here for today. But we do have a few minutes for questions, comments. So I'm opening the floor. Everybody's blown.
I have a simple question.
Sure.
Yes, our friends today, friends, they say it's fiction. I mean,
right.
we see it, but it's just fiction, imagination.
Right.
And we have to usually recede when we get that response. How do we prove it's not fiction?
So I don't think you're ever going to prove it to somebody, right? Because until somebody, finds an archaeological dig, the place of Sinai, and shows that there was actually X number of people. Until that happens, which you and I both know is never going to happen, right? You'll never be able to convince somebody of that. So, first of all, we have to remember that in Rabbi Yehuda Levi's time, that wasn't the kind of objections he was dealing with, right? That he was talking to the Kuzari, and the Kuzari said, yeah, everyone agrees and everyone accepts that, because everyone in that world included Christianity and Islam, both of whom, to various degrees, agree with the basic story of that's recorded in whatever you want to call it, the Old Testament in Christian words, or the Bible, or whatever you want to call it. So he wasn't dealing with that particular objection. However, I think he did drop a few clues, right, for us. And I tried to point them out as we learned them. And I think that when he had the Kuzari, the king of the Khazars, say, even if you're going to tell me that these were tricks, right, that line to me is what I latched onto. Because so what do I do when I'm walking down the street and Joe Schmo comes by and says, oh, it's all a bunch of baloney, right? It never happened. It's all just a myth. So, okay. So maybe I can't prove to you, and maybe Sinai didn't happen the way it's described in the Torah. Maybe the sea didn't actually split. Maybe the people just walked through a wadi, and then they got to the other side, and the Egyptians got there when the wadi filled with water and got washed away. So it wasn't really a miracle. Maybe there wasn't really blood. It was just red tide. Maybe, right? So the Kuzari said that the king of the Khazar says, even if these were all tricks, the bottom line history of the people who were oppressed, the story of the Jewish people, right, is something that you can't deny. Now, first of all, there's no logical reason why we should have invented this story, right? Now, even if you're going to tell me that this detail is not true, that detail is not true. But our history as a people is real and it's true. Now, unfortunately, in modern times, when people make up BS, and as long as you have 1 million followers on TikTok, people believe you're BS, right? So now people can deny what happened yesterday, right? They can deny. If you can do something, it can be filmed, and then an hour later they're denying it already. And then if 1 million people watch it on TikTok, then they don't believe that it happened. But we don't have to even go back all the way to Sinai to believe in something special about who we are as a people. You don't have to go back that far. When anyone that is familiar with and learns and reads and knows and experiences our trajectory through history realizes that there's something special. Exactly what it is, how to define it, how to describe it. Okay, we can all have different ways and understandings, but it's impossible to deny. There is no parallel on the face of the earth to the experience of the Jewish people. And to me, that means a lot, and it makes it special. What it means, we have the rest of the book to go into that, right? And we have the rest of our lives to think about that. But it's something special, and it's something special to be a part of. And that's to me, that's why I think he threw that little phrase in there, because I think Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was anticipating us. Even if you don't believe in all this stuff, look at what we lived through. And that's my answer. Go ahead. You're telling me so it's all a bunch of fun. Okay, fine. But just look in the 20th century what we survived and what we made it through and where we are today. In the 19th century, 18th century, every century, look at what we did. Look at where we are. And here we are. That's remarkable. Very remarkable and very special and very something to be very proud of. And to me, it means we have a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous privilege. And that's what it means to be a Jewish people. And this is what the Kuzari is really trying to tell the people at a time when people were being oppressed from all sides. It's not, it's hard to make comparisons. Every time is different. Every situation is different. So I don't mean to say we're in the same situation, but unfortunately right now we live in a country, for example, or in a world where the left wing has become, anti-Semitism has become not only acceptable, but honorable. The right wing anti-Semitism has become and acceptable and honorable. The very state where I lived 2 weeks ago, a dude was arrested by the FBI with a house full of bombs and guns with plans to blow up every synagogue in Alabama. So if people think we're safe from the right, no, we're not. People think we're safe from the left, no, we're not. And where are we? We're stuck. We don't have people on the right. We don't have people on the left. On the right, we have Tucker Carlson and what's her name, the woman, whatever, the popular woman who blogs, whatever, Candace Owens, who's flowing with anti-Semitic filth, and each one has 3 to 4 million followers apiece. And on the left, they elect somebody who refuses to, as mayor of New York, who refuses to globalize the Intifada, which to me means kill the Jews. So we're stuck with nobody. I'm sorry, I'm ranting now. I know, but we're stuck on both ends. Here we are, but we make it anyway. We'll be fine. We'll manage. We're stuck between both this end and that end. We don't have a place. We don't have a place to go, but we'll get through it. We'll manage. But this is where we've been, and that's where they were in the time of the Kuzari's writing. The Christians were on one end, the Muslims were on the other end. Wherever they ran, they persecuted them there, and they ran to the other side until they persecuted them there, and they ran to the other side. So the Kuzari came to tell them, guys, you're special. And we always have to remember that's the context within which this book was written. And obviously our times are very different, but they're unfortunately not that much different. And Yosef, go ahead, and then I'll close up.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that one of the problems of the recent maybe 20 years is that a lot of Jews forgot that we are the chosen people, and they think that we are the favored people, and so they allow themselves to be racist towards Muslims, blacks, LGBTQ, whatever, and we really have no right. That's not why Hashem put us here. We are chosen to teach Hashem's word, and to every single prayer we end with prayer for peace. We can't, like 2 years ago when the war started, my uncle called Hamas Amalek, and then I realized why I'm so afraid of AI, because if they'll get hold of a nuclear submarine and bomb Gaza, guess what? Half of Israel will be gone as well. So,
Yeah.
um, but it's like there was a story in the Bronx. There were 136 active shuls in the Bronx until about 1930, and they started closing one by one. In the 20s, one of the synagogues put in cherem a Jewish man who sold his house to a black family. And for me, that's this Jewish racism that is 100% wrong. Like, it's the our only land is the land of Israel. If you want to put the cherem, somebody who sold his house to an Arab in the middle of Shechona in Beersheba, okay, but the Bronx is not our homeland. So anyway,
Well, I totally agree with your sentiment that there should be no place for racism in our people, and unfortunately, much of the world thinks that we think when we say we're the chosen people, it means that we think we're better than everyone else. But nothing could be further from the truth. And we're chosen to be and set an example for everyone, and that example should be one of love, But here we are.
Well,
We've yeah. Go ahead, Jack.
I just want to say a couple of things. One is that, it's interesting that in his time, with the Kuzari, what he's doing is talking to someone that's influential that may be able to understand us and maybe swayed to understand the beauty of Judaism and what it's all about.
Mhm.
And why it's important to us and to the world that we stay like we are. The difference, though, between then and now is that there was no power, that they were not strong enough to stand up for themselves. In spite of trying to influence people who had influence in the world, they couldn't sway enough to prevent the horrors that occurred in mass. Now, I agree that we have anti-Semitism and there are people that are here trying to do us harm. And with the exception of the Arab world, places where we live, the government is not really isn't acting on us as other governments have to really kill us and destroy us and take our possessions and do those things that happened decades ago. A lot of it's because we are stronger in terms of being able to influence people. But the other thing is, Israel's there, and Israel is very strong, and Israel defends itself. And Jews in general now defend themselves. In free societies, they're able to do that. So I think we have a little advantage over those days in that we can still defend ourselves, and we have the ability to do that. And Israel is a big part of that. And most people that we associate with who understand Judaism are in support of Israel and in support of our survival. So I think we have more allies at this point in time than we ever had in past generations. So, there are bad things, but I think we have to look at the positive in terms of where we are today. And we ought to think about those things as we proceed on with this book in terms of where we are now and where we were at that time in terms of the Jewish people. So I just put that in perspective.
It's an important perspective. It's important for us to remember and recall that, and also to remember that the Kuzari is really the birth. And I said this early on in these series of lectures of modern Zionism. It wasn't Theodor Herzl. It was Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who set the people's hearts on fire to return to the land. And you're going to feel that as we go through the book. The ultimate culmination of this book is let's go back. And let's reestablish our homeland. So it's not what you're saying is important. Is very relevant to this entire book. I mean, and on trying to understand Zionism by backtracking to Herzl and the modern political Zionist movement is making a giant mistake. for a lot of reasons, but we'll have to discuss that if we ever have a lecture on Zionism. But when we learn Kuzari, you'll see where it comes. Obviously, it precedes him. Our feelings for the land of Israel precede him, but he gave voice to that yearning in a powerful way. For largely that reason. All right, I think we definitely over our time. So, Mir Hashem, look forward to next week. We'll continue, and thank you very much for participating again. I really enjoy these conversations and this learning together, and I wish everyone a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thank you, Saul. Very good.
Bye bye.
Thanks.